Now, some people may notice an alteration here, that I'm not saying, how did you handle that, or how have you handled that? And that's because there's another thing to understand about running, as far as I'm concerned, any processing, but it certainly applies to power very, very well, which is, well, I mean, let's talk about the idea of running flows, okay? Because how has that been handled does not imply any particular flow, does it? It's a very important point. So bear with me, and I'm going to fill you in on that right now, okay? Okay. Auditing over bypass charge on one matter when a different matter is already in stimulation doesn't work out very well. Auditing over a problem equals no case gain, and auditing over an ARC break will lower one's tone level. Now, the Church of Scientology developed a rather extensive collection of repair lists to be used when sessions go bad, all of them designed to ferret out and resolve charge bypassed in the session. So now, on top of bypass charge, a pre-clear is being made to sit through an assessment of usually over 40 questions at his expense, bypassing charge all the while in hopes of identifying the bypass charge so that it can be handled. And needless to say, repair lists are not popular. As a note here, I haven't used a repair list in years. So the first conclusion is it's non-optimum to bypass charge in session. It shouldn't happen. Okay? It may happen. If it does, you know what? You can just check with the pre-clear and just handle it on the spot. But anyway, to continue. On to flows. Flows are the direction from cause to effect. In Scientology, these are numbered thusly. Flow 1, others to self. Flow 2, self to others. Flow 3, others to others. Flow 0, self to self. Joe throws a snowball at you. Ouch, that's flow 1. You throw a snowball at Joe, he gets hurt, you feel badly. That's flow 2. You see Bob cream Bill with a snowball. That upsets you. That's flow 3. You throw a snowball as high into the sky as you can, and you get bonked by it, and that's flow 0. Bonked is a technical term. Look it up. Okay, we're talking here about charge bypassed and processing by the processing. That would be an ARC break or a problem, but rudiments are intended to clear the pre-clear's attention so that processes can be run, not to be a substitute for handling the material restimulated by the auditing question. We've all experienced the fact of seeing something happen to someone else and having that restimulate something that happened to us. Having something happen to us that restimulates something we've done to someone else. Seeing someone do something to their self that restimulates something we've done to ourselves. You've all experienced that. This is important. Think about that. A similar occurrence on any flow can be restimulated by a similar occurrence on any other flow. This is very important. What does this demonstrate? It demonstrates the bank is not compartmented into flows. That should be obvious. Okay? So if you're going to recall a time when you were hit with a snowball, then there's an excellent chance that you're going to think of a time you hit somebody else with a snowball, or a time when somebody hit somebody else with a snowball. So any question that's flow-oriented, in which case the pre-clear is directed to, at times, force or bypass their file clerk, their natural tendency to look at what's presented next so that they can get something that specifically answers that too specific a question. So you take a time, recall a time you were hit with a snowball, okay, but it might bring to mind the time when you observed someone else experiencing a similar thing. But the auditor didn't ask you a question like recall a time of experiencing snowball throwing or some other wording that was neutral or open about flows. He only asked you for a time when you were hit with a snowball. So what happens to the charge restimulated in a different flow? Well, that's called bypass charge. What happens? It hangs and it gets in the way. That's bad. If the other flow reads and is run later on, the charge might get picked up, but then that's rocky too, because you're not paralleling the mind anymore. Again, parallel the mind. Whatever presents itself next is what should be resolved, what should be addressed. It's way too simple. Instead of looking for clever commands, just run what's being presented. Okay, and that muddles up the case gain when you stick to one flow and this happens. And there's so much case gain to be made on so many processes, you really don't want to do this. And that's where TR3 is misapplied. Recall a time you hit somebody with a snowball. Well, actually, I'm getting a time when somebody hit me with a snowball. So if you've been wrongly drilled on TR3, to coin a phrase, correctly, wrongly drilled, then when the pre-clear gives you the answer that their file clerk is presenting, but it's not the flow you asked for, then you're going to correctly misapply TR3, and you're going to say, okay, I'll repeat the question. Recall a time when you were hit with a snowball. Oh, boom, bypass charge. The pre-clear feels invalidated. The pre-clear's own sense of certainty is actually affected by this. You're telling them they're giving you a wrong answer. A pre-clear is incapable of giving a wrong answer, unless you force them to. They're going to give you whatever is presenting itself, and therefore that's paralleling their mind. There's no wrongness in that whatsoever. There is wrongness in not accepting it. I just can't emphasize that enough. Parallel the mind. Okay, so that's the point we're making in how we're running power processing. Whether it's interiorization or anything else we're running with power processing, we are not asking for a specific flow. We are saying, how was that handled? Because when you say, tell me a condition encountered of knocked in, okay, the pre-clear is now free to express what their file clerk is handing out if it happens to be a condition that someone caused someone else to experience, instead of suppressing it and bypassing charge. And you say, how was that handled? Well, the pre-clear may tell you how he handled it from an observational viewpoint, from an experiential viewpoint. He may tell you how the person causing the condition handled it. You never know. It's going to be whatever it needs to be. That's why it's coming up. It's the next layer of answer. So if you say, how was that handled? Now you're not suppressing the pre-clear. Now you're allowing them to give you exactly what they need to give you. So compare this again to an int rundown, where you're telling the pre-clear what flows they may answer in, where you're telling the pre-clear what buttons are acceptable to use to run, and you're forcing a lot of things on a pre-clear. And you wonder why people go through 7 int rundowns, and they're still not sure how they feel about it. So this was developed really based on logic and on observation. And as I said, I have actually run this power processing as relates to interiorization, exteriorization on several pre-clears now. On each one of them, the change was dramatic. It was on running the process once, allowing for all flows. On the interiorization phrase and the exteriorization phrase, that was real to them. The one that indicated, the one that conveyed the idea best because it came out of them. In every case, there was an immediate and full resolution. In every case, there was no further trouble, worry, concern, dramatization, crying or shaking over interiorization and exteriorization. Now, why? Mostly because the technique of power processing is so wonderfully effective. Utilizing effort processing and cycling on the track and being oriented to allow the pre-clear's file clerk to go exactly where they need to go and accepting their answers. And one more thing one should know, in general, power processing is unlimited. Unlimited means it can be run again and again and again and again. I have run power processing sometimes more than 25 times on the same individual because, as I said at the beginning, we're getting the incident necessary to resolve the case, which means at this point in time, the outer layer, the incident that is most dominating the pre-clear's consciousness. So whatever you've already run is no longer the answer to the question. What's there now is the answer to the question. So there is no liability in running power processing over and over and over and over, and in fact, there's liability in not doing that. You're leaving a lot of charge on the table. And that's not what auditing is for, leaving the charge on the table. And this should be combined with the right amount of positive gain processing, with objective processing. You want to keep the having this up. You want to process the pre-clear in the direction of ability, not disability, towards positives, not negatives. So when the pre-clear is presenting negatives, you run something like this, power processing. But then I always follow a successful run of power processing with a process from creation of human ability or a similar process, in which case they are creating something and increasing an ability. If you process a pre-clear in one direction too long, to just look for more wrongnesses, more negatives to delete, they can actually shrink, and they can actually get hopeless because, like I said, there's no finite end to the number of negatives and incidents that could be processed. But you do not want to process the pre-clear in the direction of more wrongnesses all the time. This is said in Scientology. This is said in Recognition of the Rightness of the Being from the Basic Auditing Series. And I can't emphasize it enough. Power processing is every bit as wonderful as you can imagine. It is magnificent. But you want to just balance it with positive gain processing. And that's not a rote thing either. Okay, that's not completely rote either. You want to select a process that is appropriate to the material you just ran on power. Whatever that material was, whatever abilities, inabilities, spiritual goals, wants, or desires relate to what came up in that power processing. You'll be amazed if you look through creation of human ability and that you can find more than one process that's appropriate to that. You find the one that's most appropriate and you run it, and now you've got a pre-clear who's really, really winning. And I want to thank both Ron Hubbard and John McMasters and everybody else who was involved. To my collaborator, a colleague of mine, who we co-audited power many times, many times successfully, who prefers not to have his name out there, and that's just fine with me. I'm just fortunate to have the right help. We can all learn from each other. And again, I'm not suggesting that this can't be improved upon. I welcome your ideas, I welcome your contributions, and I'm very happy and willing to share everything I have, and I wish everybody success, and I hope that they'll share with me what they have, so we can all continue growing in the same direction of whatever our particular goals are. And thank you very much. Thank you, Tatiana.